about the film The Woman King. Okay. And we know The Woman King debuted on, I think it was September 16th. We know it came in #1 opening weekend. It'll probably do something like another 12 million this weekend. And the film, you and I have both seen the film. And the film deals with the African kingdom of Dahomey. It deals with the African female, what are called African female warriors, the Agojie. And there's been a lot of talk about this movie. There are a lot of different African themes, African culture, dealing with African history, all this in the film. So I wanted to bring you on to break down some more of this history, explain to us the cultural influences that we see in the film, and also separate fact from fiction as well. And we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, as well as our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. And for those that may not be familiar with Professor James Small, I just want to give a brief introduction. We've had him on the African History Network show, something like 12, 13 times, something like that. You've seen him in the Hidden Colors documentaries, the documentary Hapi, which deals with the role of economics in the development of civilization, from Taki Grant and Sister Felicia. And he and I are also in the documentary Elementary Genocide Part 3, Elementary Genocide Part 3, from director Raheem Shabazz. Now, Professor James Small is a scholar, activist, dynamic speaker, organizational consultant. Also, he has been an activist since his teenage years. His in-depth knowledge, thought-provoking, and calm delivery are influential elements to break the programming of miseducation. He has studied extensively with Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, another one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who we've had on the show numerous times before as well, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Wade Nobles, who we've had on before, Dr. Amos Wilson, and Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, who I had the pleasure of interviewing 3 times also. Now, Professor James Small taught for 15 years at the City University of New York, including 13 years at the City College of New York's Black Studies Department, where he taught courses on Pan-Africanism, Malcolm X, and on comparative African religions, which included several African spiritual systems titled African Religion and Survival. And he taught 2 years at New York City Technical College, teaching the course African Folklore and Religion, both in the diaspora and in Africa. He's traveled to Africa numerous times. He is also currently conducting, well, he has taught online courses on African spirituality, covering the Yoruba Ifa tradition, the Akan spiritual tradition, Vodun, and ancient Egyptian sacred science. And also, he is the historical consultant on my favorite show, Godfather of Harlem, on Epics. Okay, I can't wait for the new season to start up in January 2023. All right, so once again, we want to welcome to the African History Network show one of my teachers, one of my friends, Professor James Small. All right, brother. So thanks for taking time out today.
Yes, Brother Michael.
Yes, sir. So you've seen, and everybody watching, let us know how the audio is. I want to make sure you can hear both of us. So you've seen the film, The Woman King. So we're going to start off from the beginning. What were your thoughts on it? People already know what I thought about it. I did a 3-hour broadcast last Sunday on the African History Network show. So what were your thoughts? Initial thoughts?
Crazy. Well, the first thing I want to mention, because a lot of people fail to mention it when they do my biography.
Okay.
I'm the successor to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X.
Yes.
At age 21, after his assassination, I became the imam of the Muslim Mosque, Inc., where I served 11 years, while serving 18 years as his sister Ella's bodyguard.
Right. So I saw that in the bio. You told me don't read the whole thing.
Yes, so but that part is my foundational piece.
Right.
And I just want to mention that because in The Godfather of Harlem, Malcolm will be assassinated in this last episode that's coming up. And we're really trying to do that in a way with dignity to him and the family and not the usual stuff we see. Right. I just want people to know that I come from that. That's my birth space.
Right. Exactly.
Movement.
Exactly.
I saw the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I did a couple of talks on it. People just caught me off guard. I sent a couple of people to it because usually I don't go watch too many Black movies because the wrong people are producing and directing and paying for it.
Right.
So I sent a couple of the brothers from the Sons of Africa, watch it, come back, give me a good, and they had a good report. And some friends called who I love and trust, and they loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a couple of shows without seeing it, and I realized something this significant you can't do that with.
Right.
So I went yesterday myself, and I sat quietly, and I was blown the hell away. You know?
Exactly.
I mean, everybody know I love Viola Davis. I mean, if her husband say I'm divorcing Viola today, I'll tell Carol you're going to have a second wife in the house because I'm going to propose tomorrow. She is one extraordinary actress.
Yes.
One hell of a professional when it comes to this industry with all the things I've read about her. Mm-hmm. But watching this performance, just like you don't get no better playing a role.
Right.
From start to, she don't let up, you know.
Right.
From the opening line to the last moment, this woman is portraying that general who would then become the king. And the one thing I'm going to say to our people, a woman king is not an anomaly in Africa. We got women kings in Africa right now. Matter of fact, one of them is my goddaughter, Diambi, king of the Congo. Okay,
what's her name again? What's her name again?
Diambi, King Diambi. She's king of the Order of the Leopards. She sits on the throne that once held by Nzinga and expanded into the total of the Congo itself.
Right.
She's from the Luba people in the southeast, where she's a queen of the Luba kingdom, but she's king of the Congo kingdom. Hatshepsut in early Egypt was the king of Egypt. Right. And we know of at least 3 to 4 other female kings of Egypt before Hatshepsut. All right. Right now, there's at least 5 woman kings in Nigeria in the different kingdoms. So this is nothing new. If you understand African culture, and you can take this back to Aset in ancient Kemet, the woman is the power, and she gives to the man the authority. Operating from the throne is authority, but being granted that authority comes from the power, which is the female structure in African society. Let me show how it works in, say, Ghana, and then we'll come back to the movie, right?
Okay.
Let's take the Ashanti Nation, the Asante Hene, king of kings of the Asante Nation, gets to be the king because he's a son of a sister of the king he's replacing. So multiple men are raised to be king, but at the end of the day, the women who raise them choose the best, most ethical, most prolific, most prepared one, and recommend that person to the men to be installed. Only the women can bring you to kingship. The men carry out the ceremonial process, but it is the power that grants the man the authority. Take it all the way back to Kemet. A lot of people are into Kemet lately. Go back to ancient Kemet, and you will see Aset sitting, and she has a chair on her head. That's the throne of Earth. That's the throne of Africa.
Right.
The chair on her head is a symbol that she, the woman, is the throne. So who's the king of kings in ancient Kemet? Right? The king of kings in ancient Kemet, every king have to become who? Haru. Haru sits on the lap of Aset because the lap of the woman is the throne of Earth. See, that's African understanding of culture. Right. And when you sit on that throne, right, you do not sit as yourself. You sit as your ancestors. Yeah. Right. That sits you right here. That That's Heru, sitting on the throne. The throne of earth is Aset. And when he sits on the throne, he's sitting on the throne as the ancestors, because Aset represents the line to divine itself, which is the primary ancestor of the human race. So that's what African spiritual culture about kingship is all about. And if you understand this, it's easy to understand why there's a woman king being exalted in this movie. Yes, a lot of the movie is fiction, like most movies are.
Correct.
But a lot of it is historical.
Right.
Even if the timeline may not be on, the events is historically rooted. And then when you look at the cultural pieces, which we could talk about as we go along, I'll mention some up front. There's a young man named Malik.
Yes.
And you'll find a young lady who would become known as the daughter to the general, who's played by Sister Viola. She, on occasion, because he developed a friendship with this young man, gives him a statue of Ogun.
Right.
Ogun is one of the primary orishas and deities of the Yoruba tradition, or the Ifa tradition. And you'll hear them talk about the Ifa tradition throughout, because that is the spiritual tradition of Dahomey, because Dahomey is an extension of the original Yoruba kingdom. Right. Matter of fact, it was founded by one of the sons of the founder of the Yoruba kingdom. And so that tradition is there. And what are you going to see happen to the young man in the movie is he will transform from a young man coming from Brazil, whose mother is African, who had been enslaved, and whose father was European. But on her mother's deathbed, her mother told him he needed to go back home to find himself. Go back to her land, her home of Dahomey, because that is his home. And so the statuette that she gives him is of the one Orisha that is the primary Orisha of transformation of the human character. And you will see the transformation of Malik as you watch the movie. It's just beautifully done.
This is what I've been talking about.
I know the director. I've heard of her.
Gina Prince-Bythewood, who directed Love and Basketball.
Okay, so
African-American woman, just so people don't know.
I love that piece, right?
Yes.
But I've been working in studio with Godfather every day, 12-hour days sometimes, going on now 3 years, and working on the project with the writers and others for the last 6 years. So I've learned a lot about how this thing works. And what I saw yesterday in the theater, those Black women kicked butts and putting together a document that every Black person should be proud of. Exactly. You see, I see a couple of little flaws, but I'm not going to even mention them. You know why? Because it's overridden by the positive to such an extent, they're not noticeable in your consciousness.
That's what I've been saying. Exactly. And here's the thing. So I have we have 1 million followers on our fan page, the African History Network. So I've been posting a lot about the movie. I saw it, been posting articles about it, video clips, parts of interviews with Viola Davis, things like this. And 99.9% of the people who saw the movie loved the movie. They say they were blown away by it. And then I talked to people who at first said they weren't going to see it, and they saw the movie. They were blown away by it as well. Okay, this is phenomenal.
That was me. I wasn't initially going to see it. I'm tired of them doing the smile in your face and poison us on the back end, right? That didn't happen this time. What I saw this time was Black artists, Black craftsperson, Black technician, Black actors doing an interpretation in fiction and history with African folklore that you just got to see to believe. And so I call all my children and said, take my grandkids, buckle up, hook up, take my grandkids. They got to go see this piece.
Right, exactly.
And I don't do that very often because I'm not a movie goer. I only go to the movie.
Right.
You know? But this one treated African history with what I like to call African integrity.
African integrity.
African integrity was so glowing. And not just the visual, but in the dialogue. You heard this praising in the dialogue. This African dignity in the dialogue. This African love in the dialogue. I go like, damn, this is really good. And I found myself crying on more than one occasion. I don't do that.
Right. I cried at the end. I shed some tears at the end.
My breath a couple of times. I was hit so heavy because, I love African history like you.
Right.
I've absorbed myself in it. I live it. And that movie had me reeling. And I've been to Benin. I've been to Dahomey. I've been in the very palace they shot the film in multiple times.
Yes.
I've been before the voodoo pope on my knees to be blessed because I'm a voodoo adapt, not a priest. I'm an adapt, one who practices, who knows the tradition.
A Vodun?
Yes. Well, the state religion in Benin is Vodun.
Vodun, right.
Vodun is the Dahomey manifestation of what we call Yoruba.
Yeah.
Same
the spiritual system.
But manifests different in different cultures, different locations. It's right. At the end of the day. And the word voodoo in that language means the essence of the divine within either nature or the human being. That's what voodoo means, the essence of the divine.
Right. Well, we're gonna go. I'm gonna go to the official synopsis of the movie to give some people the background information on the movie, on the synopsis, and then we're going to continue. I want you to explain African integrity in just a minute, but first I got to recognize my friend, and I'm also Professor Hunter Adams. He's watching right now. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Professor Hunter Adams, thanks so much for watching. He said, I agree, Professor James Small. So absolutely. So let's look at this here. So the official website is thewomanking.movie, thewomanking.movie. I want to look at the official synopsis, and then we're going to delve deeper. Because one of the things I want to just briefly explain to people is when you hear that a movie is based on a true story, right? You really have to understand what that means, because there are 4 different types of true story screenplays. There are 4 different types of ways to tell the story. And it's okay. So The Woman King is the remarkable, this is the official synopsis. The Woman King is the remarkable story of the Agojie, the all-female unit of what they call warriors who protected the African kingdom of Dahomey in the 1800s with skills and a fierceness unlike anything the world has ever seen. Quote unquote, inspired. This is the key word, everybody. Inspired by true events, The Woman King follows the emotionally epic journey of General Naniska, played by Oscar winner Viola Davis, and it was her production company, her and her husband Julius, their production company that produced this film, as she trains the next generation of recruits and readies them for battle against an enemy determined to destroy their way of life. Some things are worth fighting for. It's directed by Gina Prince-Bythewood, who's an African-American female woman. Story played by Maria Bello and Dana Stevens, 2 white women, and produced by Kathy Schulman, Viola Davis, husband Julius Tennant, and Maria Bello. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to go through that, Professor Small, very quickly here is, and I've done a ton of research on the film as well. There is, I've experienced this before with other movies, and you have to be careful when you hear a term like based on a true story. You have to really understand what it is. So very quickly, there are 4 ways to tell these historical movies. Okay, this is a good article everybody can read. It's from screencraft.org. Is your script based on, quote unquote, based on or inspired by a true story? What's the difference? So you have based on a true story, you have based on true events, you have inspired by a true story, and inspired by true events. Those are 4 different types of ways of telling a story. Each one has different levels of fiction interwoven into them. The Woman King according to the official synopsis, is inspired by true events. Okay. I want to briefly explain what that means. Screenplays don't come as loose as the term, quote unquote, true, as they do with stories, quote unquote, inspired by true events. Okay. This is not the attack of Woman King. I just want people to understand this. These scripts take a true event. We can blow this up even more. These scripts take a true event and tell a cinematic story with nearly all fictional characters and fictional macro events. Okay. So once again, I study a lot of movies. I've done lectures dealing with different movies. So you just have to understand how they're telling this movie. Is it based on a true story? Is it based on true events? Is it inspired by a true story or inspired by true events? Inspired by true events, by definition, based upon the industry, is going to have more fiction in it than the other ways of telling these stories. Okay. Go ahead, Professor Small.
Well, the key thing, because I work with the Godfather of Harlem.
Yes,
and
exactly.
It's based on true events.
Yes.
And the Godfather of Harlem, we really do the autobiography of Malcolm X. We've actually devoted more time to doing that than any other cinematic production ever. Okay. Malcolm X have been in something like about 12 episodes, also, no, 22 episodes when it's over, 22 or 23 episodes of this piece. And my fighting there is to keep what I call African integrity and historical authenticity, which is not easy. Okay.
Exactly.
But it has gotten easy because the writers are both black and white, 50%. But they come from
on Godfather of Harlem. On Godfather of Harlem.
They come from the industry's protocols. So here comes this guy from a Black Studies, Black nationalist background, who knows nothing about writing, but want to see images on the screen that reflect African integrity, and reflect the historical authenticity that I think it should. But it's fiction. It's like, how do we take Malcolm X? How do we take Adam Powell? How do we take Bumpy Johnson and create a fictional story about a gangster who partners with civil rights and human rights leaders to get control of Harlem from the white operators of Harlem? How do you tell that fictional story using these historical characters and some historical events? And sitting, most of my work is done, even though I go in studio every day, my work is done with the writers in the writer's workshop before it gets to a director, before it gets to the big boys to say, okay, this is cool. And so that's where we get a chance to say, this is what the dialogue is going to look like. This is what the scene is going to look like. This is what's going to be in that room. This is what the costume is going to look like. This is what the attitude is going to be, etc. And so when I'm watching this piece, having spent so much time in Togo, Benin, and Ghana over the last 3 decades, I'm there. I mean, I'm transformed out of that theater. I'm in that palace in Dahomey where I've been multiple times. And I'm feeling the spirit of the Agojie. Because I've heard them talk about it so often. They lecture to us when we go there. The king even engaged in the lecture with us so that we begin to appreciate the history. It is not a myth that there was a woman army or women brigades that was a part of the greater Dahomey army. It wasn't a complete woman army. They had men too. But the women brigade, the men made up the infantry. The women made up the battle soldiers. And they were fierce. And they do little demonstrations for you when you go to visit, and you begin to appreciate this. And I'm watching and it goes. And I've also studied, like you, many of the rebellions and the resistance on the ground in Africa before we got on the slave ship. Many of the wars, many of the jihads to try and stop the slave trade. which had been going on for 1,500 years plus before 1492. So we had been at war for a long time against this thing. I've been to places where we saw part of the resistance up in northern Ghana and other areas where the people built houses without windows, if you can imagine that, right? Mm-hmm. And the fence around the house is 10 foot tall. The housing compound is 10 foot tall, but the gateway to get in the house is 2 feet tall. So you got to get on your knees to crawl into the courtyard. So an enemy would lose his head trying to come down, you understand? But that was the defensive mechanism that our people put in place. They had the windows on the roofs. The roofs open up so that they could get sunlight and air. And they just had slit in the walls to use their arrows. So we resisted. So the phenomena that is being portrayed is not abnormal nor unusual. The unusual thing is that there is an army that have a significant female presence leading it. Mm-hmm. And in this story, the story is about an extraordinary female general who would become king.
Right. The woman king. Yep.
The woman king. Mm-hmm. And so the storyline itself of how they trained and the dignity that's required and the discipline that's required and the sacrifices that's required of these women. You can't get married. You can't have children. You have to devote yourself to this because this is your devotion to saving the kingdom of Dahomey, protecting the kingdom of Dahomey, not just, and protecting our king, but not just the king. And Viola, in the dialogue, they take it to another level when she's talking to the king. He says, we're not just going to stop slavery in Dahomey. We're going to stop slavery throughout Africa. You know?
Right.
It's not just going to be our people we're fighting for. We're going to fight for any people. Mm-hmm. If this wasn't real history, I would want it to be.
Exactly.
Okay. We've watched Wonder Woman. When I was a child, I loved Wonder Woman when I was a child.
The Amazons. Yep.
All right. We watched Supergirl. You know what I'm saying? They were fictitious stories about white women heroes that was saving the white community. That's cool. Now we got this massive black group of heroines saving the black community. Psychologically in your head, something is being planted that you didn't come into this without a fight. And our women, we live in a society that marginalizes women across the board, but particularly marginalized African women, both historically and currently. And to see a piece that raised African women to the level they deserve to be on, because historically they were those women. That's not a myth. There was this female army, and they were one of the best in West Africa. That's not a myth. You had females in the Egyptian army. That's not a myth. You had females, Amanatu, who led the northern Nigerian army against the Islamic incursion. That's not a myth. You had a female warrior who led the Moorish army against the Abbasid invasion into North Africa in the 800s. That's not a myth. Right. But we have more data and information on Dahomey than we have on any of those other spaces. And the writers and the director have put together a piece showing what could have been, maybe was to some degree, on the part of the women who represent that element of society that was involved in the military defense of their nation and the projecting and protecting of their culture and their race. And it was just done beautifully. I went in thinking I was going to be critical, mean, and hard. I came out of there crying like a baby. I go like, damn. This just took it off. Just took it out.
Exactly. And there was so much African culture, so many references to history.
Talking about Ifa. You saw the shrines. Those shrines were authentically done. The altars were authentically done. I saw multiple deities on the altars, you know. And let me just talk to some deities, like the king. When the king sits on the throne, he doesn't sit like, say, Brother Imhotep is made king of Chicago. Well, when he's talking to me and you in the living room, he's Brother Imhotep. But when he sits on the throne, he is the ancestors of all of us, speaking for those ancestors to us and carrying out of the will of the ancestors for us. So that's the role of a king in Africa. Not a despot that's trying to be rich and wealthy, but that's not the African story. The king has no wealth in Africa. In the African traditional sense, he's taken care of by the community. He has no need desires because they take care of his need desires. But his responsibility is to interpret the ancestral will and wisdom to his community, both as priest and as jurist, because he's the head of the court in the community. That's the king in Africa, male or female.
Yeah, you know, a lot of our understanding of the term king comes from a European perspective.
Yeah.
Not from an African cultural perspective, because I saw a lot of comments saying, oh, it's the woman king. They're trying to emasculate the men and things like this. And I saw the movie. That's not the case. Go ahead.
That don't happen. Matter of fact, in the movie, the man is helping to train the women. In the movie, the man is fighting beside them as the lead musketeers that opens the way for those warriors to come in to play.
Right.
So, and all through the movie, you see that partnership between the general who leads the women and the king who she and those women serve. And I saw nothing emasculating or demeaning at all. I saw a partnership that simply told a fictitious presentation of a reality. There's a reality of those women warriors. There was a reality of that army being made up of warriors who were women, and that they were considered by history, both white and blacks, writing at that time, as being one of the most fierce army in the field. The only thing that stopped them was the gun technology of Europe.
Right. Exactly. Okay, this is what I want to do, because we're going to come back to this and we're going to deal with some more of the history of Dahomey, and I want to show a picture of the actual Agojie. There are some good articles written. Smithsonian Mag has a really good one with Smithsonian Institute. They have a really good one dealing with the real warriors behind the woman king. It goes deep into this history. But you mentioned in Nigeria, and you and I talked about this on the phone. So I posted this article a few days ago because I saw so many people, most of them didn't see the movie, saying, oh, they don't have women kings in Africa and things like this, right? So there are a number of different articles on this topic here. This one here is from gboah.com, gboah.com. Check out the 7 beautiful Nigerian female kings in charge of their kingdom, okay? And it goes through and lays them out and where they are in Nigeria. This is right now. This is not 100 years ago. This is right now, okay? Why do you think? So you talked about Hatshepsut in ancient Kemet. Okay, so she was. Tell us a little bit about Hatshepsut. She would be considered a woman king. We know she was.
The pharaoh is the king.
Pharaoh,
and she was the pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
The woman is the power in Africa. Men, give up your European genital danglings, because the power has nothing to do with gender. Okay,
right.
It has to do with roles in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Roles in nature. You came from the womb and the belly of a woman. It did not come from your belly, even though your sperm fertilized the eggs that became you. So let's look at how Africans looked at reality. We were in partnership with nature and cosmology. That's our culture is based on understanding cosmology and nature. And so when we look at the king, and as we see in Hatshepsut, her brother was too young to take the throne. He was too young to handle that responsibility. And so she, as the elder sister, had to take on the responsibility of being the pharaoh, of being the king, until her brother was trained enough and old enough to take over the role of kingship himself. And I remember when we first started studying ancient Egypt, And the white writers is all saying, oh, the brother came in and he hated his sister and he scraped the name off the walls. All of that is proven to be untrue.
Mm-hmm.
So all of it is proven to be untrue. That's not even African culture. That's European culture. That's what they do.
Exactly.
That's not what happens in African culture, because the kingship is a spiritual position, not a political position, though they do political work. The king is surrounded by a council of elders who instructs and informs him, okay, on his behavior. His job is to sit as the ancestors come back. I know this for a fact because I've been trained at the stool. In Ghana, I'm Nana Kofi Mpansa, the second of the Agogo stool, under the kingship of Akua Sapong. And one of my great teachers is Nana Kwabena Nketse the fifth, who's the king of Esokado in the Western region. So we talk about these things all the time, you know, because these are my questions. And so if one thing this movie would do is force us to study our history before we got to North America, then
and culture.
Then I'm
history and culture. Yep. Because a lot of this, you know, because of we've all been attacked by white supremacy and racism, and
it's made us paranoid about anything.
Well, not only that, we've internalized white supremacy. We've internalized to various extents white male patriarchy. So we don't see it. We don't see, many of us don't see African women as equals.
Right.
And then you hear woman king and you say, oh, they're trying to emasculate the man, things like this. And then you have people say, oh, there were no women kings in Africa. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
And we always praise, many people over there know Yaa Asantewaa.
Yaa Asantewaa.
And they said, oh, well, she was the queen mother. No, she was the queen mother until the king gets captured. Then she became the king. Because it was the queen mother who made him king, who named him king. Once the British captured the Santahene and there was no king on the throne, the responsibility of the kingship fell on Yaa Asantewaa, the queen mother of Ejisu, and she became the leader of the army of resistance against British occupation in central Ghana. So when we studied the history is just so beautiful when we study it and learn about our women and really get to see, oh, wow.
Exactly.
These other people's culture. We got our own culture. We have our own look at. We have our own way of knowing things. We have our own worldview that we have imposed for ourselves on ourselves. And this becomes so important. I saw somebody talked about the book Barracoon and talked about Kofi, this one brother who was sold by Dahomeans. Even in the movie, they treated this well because the current king in the movie is criticizing his brother who started this slave trade thing. And they're trying to figure out a way.
Oh, Gezo,
How do we stop it? And the woman king, as she's now the general, is saying, we must find another way to have commodities that we can make a living off. And she sets up these palm oil plantations.
Palm oils, to
create an income for the community. And I think she had another, she said we could sell gold as well to get an income. And so they're looking at it and saying, wait a minute, we're trapped because these people have put us into a situation. Now, if you study the history of Africa, coastal African peoples were basically fishermen. Most of the slave trading took place on the coast, and then they would go inland with their guns and weapons and capture people. The coastal people were subjugated. Yes, some of them were involved in the slave trade at the barrel of a gun because they had been conquered and subjugated. Study the history, learn the history. And you might learn about Chief Sam, the Ghanaian who brought 3 ships over here to take us back home, and you don't even know his name. So
Face to Face Africa has an article about him.
Let's talk about Bonsu. You said the Ashanti sold us. What about King Bonsu, who marched the Ashanti army from central Ghana down to the coast, emasculated the Dutch, took over the slave dungeon, drove them all out, free all of our people, then marched the army back up to Kumasi. Let's learn these stories. Let's learn of these great heroes. We've got brothers selling drugs to us on the streets right now. We can't deny that black people do things like that. You've got black people killing more black people on the streets every month than was killed in slavery any given month. We can't deny that's so, but we got to understand why that's so.
Right.
And so we had some folks in Africa who was involved in slave trading, but that was less than 1%. Let's talk about that 99% who were the victims or who were defenders of our people. Unless millions more would have got caught up and died in the slave trade.
I'm going to go to that in just a second because I want to share an excerpt of the book, Fighting the Slave Trade. Before we go to that, hey, everybody, I'm Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. We're speaking with one of my teachers, Professor James Small. We're talking about the film, The Woman King, as well as the real history of the West African kingdom of Dahomey and other history also. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting. I've been hosting the African History Network show for 12 years now. So this helps us keep doing the research. We also have the information at our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And just very quickly, this is up for those that don't know. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it says Michael and it shows my picture there. These other ones, and there are 5 of them out there that are fake African History Network Cash App accounts that have been stealing money from us. I've opened up an investigation with Cash App. We're trying to get them shut down. So that's why I got the information here right on the homepage of our website. So heart, give us a like on this broadcast. You can register for this 12-week online history course that I teach at our web. You can register at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And then we go through and analyze the transatlantic slave trade as well. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Class number 1 starts Saturday, November 4th, 2024, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we do the classes live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime, okay? Click right here to register here for it. You can use this content with your children as well. I would say it's PG-13. It's not overly graphic. We won't do a lot of cursing, anything like that. It's interactive. You can ask questions. We have a live text chat. You can see me. I can't see you, so you don't have to worry about, you remember during COVID and everybody was on Zoom going to work, and you're at home, you got your pajama bottoms on, but you got a suit on top or something like that, or a blouse on top. Okay, so you can wear whatever you want to wear. Okay, I don't take attendance in the class, anything like that. Download the class lesson plan here as well. I'm going to post a link here so you can register for the class. It's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, follow me on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. My YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. And on Instagram, Michael Imhotep as well. You can also, if you want to support us through Cash App or PayPal, you can do that also. You scroll down the page, we have our Cash App information, $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. We have information here, information about the African History Network show, Sundays, 9 p.m. 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But here's our Cash App information, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there, most likely. You click on the link. It takes you to our Cash App QR code. Okay, so you can scan that site. Okay, now I want to also my online classes that I teach you at our website as well. Go ahead, Professor Small.
Yeah. Well, someone said as a Black woman, my femininity is important to me. Well, girl, go watch this movie because there ain't nothing more feminine than what I was watching yesterday. I didn't want to leave the theater. One thing this movie does not do is demean the femininity of African women.
Right.
Okay. It is such a the way they do it is so. I got to meet this lady who was the director. So beautifully done.
Gina Prince-Bythewood. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So beautifully done that the women, though warriors, do not lose their femininity, do not lose their sensitivity, do not lose their love of sisterhood or motherhood. It's all through the piece. It is a well done piece. It is worthy of watching. It is something that showed us that the movement of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that produced opportunities for Black writers, Black directors, and Black actors have paid off and is paying off, so that we can get some credible quality cinema that would be worthy of helping to socialize our community in a more positive direction.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that you said that there. I'm going to go to fighting the slave trade in just a second, but I'm just going to put this out here. And, I learned from one of my teachers, Dr. Ray Hagins, and Dr. Ray Hagins as well.
Oh, yeah.
I may say some things that are outside the circumference of your own awareness. Just because you disagree with them or don't like them does not mean it's not true. You just have to do some more research to understand what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, because African Americans, because we're in this white supremacist system, this white male patriarchy system, unfortunately, many of us associate being feminine with being weak. And that's something projected to us by European culture. So then when
they'll change that.
Go ahead. Say that again.
I need to meet my mama to find if I wasn't her son, I'd marry that lady.
And my mama as well. Yeah, exactly.
She would slap you into the next world if you step wrong.
Right. But so when they see African female women who can beat a man's behind, then all of a sudden they're not feminine.
Right.
And we associate femininity with being weak, and it's like, no, that's coming from the white. I think you used the phrase white murder culture.
Yeah,
that's coming.
If they want to see about that for a minute, an example of that, they need to see the woman I've been married to for 51 years.
Right.
But I remember she was pregnant with our twins, coming home, and she got mugged by this dude.
Right.
He put up a fight, but he got away with the purse. But she was coming from the Nation of Islam fish store. She chased this dude 6 blocks with this frozen whiting. He dropped that purse. This lady got to be crazy with that big belly and that frozen fish, right? So, me and my son was laughing about that last night, talking about the movie.
and because of what we go through in this country, and because of our history, you should want a sister who can fight. You should want a sister who can help you defend the home and things like this. Unless you want to oppress the sister. Okay, unless you're afraid she's going to whip your behind because maybe you did something wrong or something like that, right? But you should want a sister who can fight. Okay, so, all right. I want to go to this right here. This is an excerpt of the book Fighting the Slave Trade by a brilliant sister, Dr. Sylvian Diop. You and I talked about this briefly today. This is the synopsis is at Amazon.com. You can try to get it from an African-American book dealer. If not, maybe Amazon. It's called Fighting the Slave Trade, West African Strategies. This is going to segue into our further discussion with Dahomey and their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, Professor Small. Fighting the Slave Trade, West African Strategies. This book came out in 2003. Sylvian Diop is a brilliant sister. I'm trying to get on the African History Network show. She's the author of many books. Here's the official synopsis of this book. While most studies of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade specifically, focus on captives and on their ethnic origins, the question of how the Africans organized their familial communal lives to resist and assail the transatlantic slave trade has not received adequate attention. How Africans fought back against this. But our picture of the slave trade is incomplete without an examination of the ways in which men and women responded to the threat and reality of enslavement and deportation. Fighting the Trade is the first book to, possibly so, this came out in 2003. Fighting the Slave Trade is the first book to explore in a systematic manner the strategies Africans used to protect and defend themselves and their communities from the onslaught of the transatlantic slave trade, and how they fought back against the transatlantic slave trade. It challenges widely held myths of African passivity and general complicity in the slave trade, and shows that resistance to enslavement and to involvement in the slave trade was much more pervasive than has been acknowledged by the orthodox interpretation of historical literature. Focused on West Africa, where Dahomey was and Benin currently is, focused on West Africa, the essays collected here examine in detail the defensive, protective, and offensive strategies of individuals, families, communities, and states, in chapters discussing the manipulation of the environment, resettlement, the redemption of captives, the transformation of social relations, political centralization, marriage, violent assaults on ships and entrepots, shipboard revolts like the Amistad slave rebellion, 1839, and controlled participation in the slave trade as a way to procure the means to attack the slave trade. Fighting the slave trade presents a much more complete picture of the West African slave trade than has been previously available. Go ahead, Professor Small.
Yes, sir. I mean, and it's like we make the mistake when we just hear a cliche or a term. Most people who never heard the word Dahomey until a month ago, all of a sudden now is telling us how Dahomey was in the slave trade. Dahomey came to power politically around the 1720, 1730. It does not get involved in the slave trade because it doesn't build up a military with the capability until around the 1760s to 1780s. That is over by 1825. Now, we're not talking about an appreciable amount of historical time. If you put everything in history on a timeline, you get a sense of what I'm talking about. And then the numbers, you look at the numbers. What was the numbers? 5,000, 10,000? Even that would be too much. But if we look at the numbers, let's stop playing. If you understand how the European works, and the best way I can do is go to the country where I have a hotel, I have a business, I have a home, and I've been back and forth living there for 30 years, Ghana. What they do, they conquer the coastal people and subdue them.
Right.
With their military technology. And then they force these coastal people to engage in the slave trade with them for their life. And as you saw that piece you just read, the coastal people also find ways to fight back. This was the Fanti Nation, where the Elmina Castle was built, the slave dungeon, and where the Cape Coast slave dungeon was built. And what the Fanti would end up doing with the Portuguese, behind the Portuguese back, they partnered with the Dutch and helped the Dutch defeat the Portuguese and drive them out of West Africa. But because of gun technology, again, they were betrayed by the Dutch. You understand? But they would then find a way to and they found a way to then partner with the British to defeat the Dutch. And when they had enough knowledge and understanding of technology and gun warfare, that same Fanti people drove the British out of Fanti region in Central Africa, forcing them to run to Accra for their life in one of the first classical guerrilla warfare scenes in history. So we need to study this thing. Yes, some of our people sell us drugs on the street, but you and I don't sell drugs to our people.
Correct.
Some of our people engage in careless gun violence in our community that kills our women and our babies, but that's not 99% of our people. Some of our people engage in the slave trade, some out of greed. I wouldn't deny that. Most out of duress because they were at the barrel of the gun of the enemy with the gun technology. But go down and just study. So you can look at something like the Battle of Islamabad down in South Africa, where Setuweya takes on the British Army with swords and spears, killed 2,000 in one day, all right? And caused the fall of the Robespierre government in London, because they were shocked. How could y'all let this happen? These folks ain't got no guns. You know what they called us, right? Go all the way up to where we're looking at the Berlin Conference. After the Berlin Conference, the invasion of Sudan, Muhammad Ahmed takes on 23,000 British troops and Turkish, Egyptian troops and send only 3,000 back up to Egypt alive. Talk about resistance. Go with Amanatu and the kingdom that was just above. There's just so many episodes of the great heroine and heroes that fought in these wars of liberation and fought of slave resistance. You will never sit back and talk about Africans stole us. Because guess who Africans were? That was your uncle, your cousin, your grandma, your brother, your great-grandma. Stop being foolish and learn the history of the great people. The genocide would have been more pervasive had we not resisted in such a beautiful and strong way for so long. And
we fought every step of the way.
And our women played a pivotal role, not just in Dahomey, but in other kingdoms in that resistance movement, many of them being the generals at the head of armies.
Mm-hmm.
Learn their story, and you'll learn how to love yourself more deeply and appreciate and respect. That's what I call African integrity. You know?
Exactly. When we look at Dahomey, and Dahomey really comes to power about 1720, and they're going to defeat Ouida. How do you pronounce that? Ouida? Okay. There's a couple of different spellings of it. So talk about cultural servitude versus chattel slavery.
Right.
Because what happens is a lot of Europeans will say, oh, Africans are slaves. Yeah. Africans had slaves. You all started this, blah, blah, blah. Talk about the cultural servitude system that Africans had compared to the chattel slavery that Europeans created.
Right. Let me correct one sister so I don't break her heart. She said the Portuguese built no castles. They built dungeons. Didn't you hear me correct myself? So stop playing. I'm correcting myself.
Right. They built dungeons.
But I understand. Yes. I understand. Yes. Well, that's Brother Leo. And of course, they built concentration camps. Yeah, I wouldn't even call them dungeons. They were concentration camps. But servitude, every society had it. Dr. Clark taught us that Africans didn't have prisons. And the reason they didn't have prisons, because they had a servitude system when you committed a crime in the community. Or if there was a war between two groups, which was rare, because the way we fought war in Africa, the heroes fought, okay? Not armies. Africa had very few standing armies. That's why we took such a whipping. We learned to develop standing armies after the invasion started, but even Egypt didn't have standing armies until they got their butt kicked. And they realized we got to build one. The only place where the spiritual foreseeing of the necessity for that was with Shaka in Zululand, where the spirit told him this force was coming, and he developed a standing army to meet that force. But in most other places, we didn't have a standing army. But what would occur when there was a conflict between two communities, and they had to go to war, the captives were brought to serve off almost like the indentured system structure the European had, except in Africa, no one took your name away. No one took your family lineage away. No one took your humanity away. No one took your spiritual identity away. And you can grow up to become the king of the very community that you're serving in.
Right.
Okay? You can grow up to marry royalty in the house in which you are serving to. That was the norm. The idea was you've committed a crime against the greater social order, and so you have to be transformed. Okay? You have to go through a transformation process and a socialization process that you can be a part of society without causing gross disruption of that society. And that servitude process that we see in multiple places in Africa did not involve putting you in prison, putting you in chains, putting you before firing squads, or anything like that. You know? It involved you becoming a part of the very community you had the conflict with. And when your time of service was over, you can either go back to your home if that's what you wanted to do, or remain a part of this community if that's what you want to do.
Right. So when we, and I've talked to Professor Kabahai Wapa-Kamene about this as well. You know him, and he's one of my teachers also. culture, and we see this in the film because there's at least there's at least one woman who's Agojie in the film who came from another ethnic group,
right?
And there was a fight between them. She was captured and she was brought in to be made Agojie, and brought into Dahomey. So we see this take place. Now Europeans had their feudalistic system with the lords and the serfs, okay, and they're going to superimpose this feudalistic system onto the cultural servitude that Africans had to create chattel slavery, to create what we call chattel slavery, basically. But talk about that for a minute.
The European system was not about family structure. It was about class and caste structure. Africa was not about class and caste structure. It's about family structure. So when you came into another community, that person's household you went into, depending on age strata, that was your father, that was your mother, that was your auntie. You were their child. That's different. What the European had was something completely different. It was based on caste and class, depending on power and wealth. That was not what the African kingdom was built on. The African kingdom was built on the fact that the king itself is the father of the community because he represents the ancestors for that community. Africans don't have queens in the way Europeans do. The king's wife is not a queen. Okay?
In the African society, the king's wife is not a queen.
In modern day African society, who's trying to play the European thing, you see a little bit of that. But in traditional ancient African society, your wife is not the queen. She's just your wife. Okay?
Right.
The queen mother is your sister or your auntie or cousin.
Okay.
But your wife would never be the queen. And the reason they do that so that fighting for the throne thing never happens. So it is the collective body of women called the queen mothers who select from among the best of the young men they have raised, because they know them better than anybody else because they raised them from infancy, to be the next king. And if a man was not available to assume that responsibility, then they chose a woman who was skilled, trained, and tooled to carry that power and that responsibility, both spiritually, judiciary-wise, and politically.
Okay, so this goes back to Auset with the throne on her head.
Absolutely.
Because Auset means the name Auset, from my understanding, means she of throne. Yeah. She of throne.
She is the throne.
She is the throne. Yeah. Okay, she is the throne. And it's the woman.
She is woman. She's not, there's nobody named Auset.
Right.
Auset is symbolic of the African woman.
Right, symbolic of the African woman, because it's the African woman who decides which man will sit on the throne. Okay, all right, and in many societies is it that in some societies is it that the lineage was matrilineal, which went through the woman side of the family, and
we kept it in America. We had a kind of a term we used that people thought was joking: mama's baby, daddy's maybe.
right.
The way they solve the bloodline is to go to the one place where you know the authenticity of a bloodline.
Right.
And that means it's not matriarchal. Matriarchal means women rule. That's a white folks term. It's
matrilineal.
No, it's matrifocal.
Matrifocal.
Okay. Meaning you must train, you trace, and there was no denigration to the man. I love my wife, but I know it's the one way to be sure that this child is who we say he is to see what womb the child came out of.
Right.
There's no way to find out what sperm the child came from. And we knew that way back then when there was no microscope or nothing at hand. We were clear. Okay.
Right.
And so you're talking about matrifocal. Now, since Islam, well, going all the way back to remember, we get the Hyksos invasion, the Greek invasion, And well, first the Hyksos, and then you get two Hyksos. Hittites, you get two Hittites invasion in northeastern Africa. Then you get the Assyrian, two Assyrian invasion of it. Then you get the Persians, two Persian invasion. Then the Greek invasion. Then the Roman invasion. And then their children, their descendants, the Arabs. See, people don't know who the Arabs are. These are the descendants of the Greeks and the Romans, and the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Hyksos. Mix up now, marrying into one another. And then they hit us in the 8th century and have the deepest incursion into Africa. And that's where you see a lot of the patriarchal systems in the areas that was once conquered by Islam or still fundamentally Islamic in Africa. So you see the patriarchal there. But in traditional non-Islamic Africa, it's matrifocal, almost 100%. Okay.
Now, when we talk about Dahomey, I know you and I were talking about this earlier today, and Dahomey is made to be, and I see like some European writers doing this. I see this in the media. Dahomey is being made out to be like they were more involved in the transatlantic slave trade than Great Britain was. Yeah, and Great Britain takes out like they take out 3.1. Great Britain was involved from 1562 to 1834 when they finally, even after 1807. We'll talk about 1807 in just a minute. They involved for 272 years. Talk about Dahomey and how it gets involved in the transatlantic slave trade.
Well, again, for the same reason, Dahomey in 1720, when the kingdom is formed, or when it comes to power, it was always a small kingdom. And remember, Dahomey wasn't the size of today's Benin.
Right.
It was a small kingdom within that territory. There was Vida, Cotonou, and other kingdoms on the coast that was rivaling them in terms of commerce and trade. But once the European came, the European got involved immediately in capturing Africans for the slave trade. And the first thing they would do was to bring to servitude the coastal population. Okay? That's the Vida, the Cotonou, because those people don't have guns. So we can understand the degree to which gun technology plays in the slave trade.
Right.
Okay.
14th century.
Came there with militaries, with cannons, and with guns. And in one day, they could level all the African villages in the community. People have never even heard an explosion before. You got to get the psychology of all of that. So once you find yourself being invaded and occupied by these people, and they're making you a part of their army. So now you're someone who you had a traditional argument with, and y'all would have a palaver over it and settle it with somebody bringing some cocoa and something else. You got an army with people with guns now marching you against that foe.
Right.
And capturing those people and putting them in slavery. So by the time you get, and then the other piece we keep forgetting, and we need to call it out for what it is. There's an Islamic slave system in place in Africa for 1,500 plus years before 1492. There's the Trans-Indian Ocean slave trade. There's the Trans-Saharan slave trade. And before they were bringing Africans enslaved to North America, they were taking them enslaved to Europe. We never talk about slavery in Europe. You know, we try to play with the few people who call, the Moors, there's a picture of a Moor, there's a statue of a Moor. No, we were enslaved in Europe. Okay? That's the reason the Moors went into Spain. They were chasing the Visigoths, the German, back out of North Africa.
The Vandals and the Visigoths.
Right. Yeah. So for the comeback, but to let people know about from the 8th century forward, Islamic nations have now invaded Africa. And one of the first things they do is get involved in putting us into slavery. They got into what we call today ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide. Cultural genocide is imposing their religion on us and destroying our religious spaces. And those of us who resist is either killed or sold into slavery. So this is going on for 1,500 years. So this is what the Africans got at his back when the Portuguese are coming. So we're looking at the Portuguese and them with some welcoming because we think we've got a force that can deal with the force that we've been dealing with. because those forces were in collaboration with one another. And no one talked about that collaboration.
Okay, so with Dahomey, they have a cultural servitude system just like African societies did.
Anywhere in the Bantu area was pretty much the same, because the boundaries we see today, those boundaries weren't there then.
Yeah, they come from the Berlin Conference largely.
Right.
Yeah,
we're talking about the major empire, which they're talking about in the films, called the Oyo.
Oh, that's what I was about to ask. Explain the Oyo Empire and the conflict between the Oyo Empire and Dahomey.
The greater Yoruba nation.
Right.
Yoruba is not a religion. Yoruba is a people.
Right? And just 1 second, everybody watching, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart on this broadcast. Go ahead, Professor Small, answer that question. Yeah. I'll be right back.
So
you can go ahead, keep talking.
The Yoruba nation and the founder of that nation had 4 sons who went out in different places and settled other lands and built other kingdoms. Well, Dahomey is one of those kingdoms that members of the Yoruba royal family developed and built. But over time, like what happens between many communities, conflict developed around trade, conflict developed around secession, conflict developed around all kinds of things. So Dahomey breaks away from the Oyo kingdom, okay? And so there's a conflict between them. But that even in the story, the fictitious thing of the Oyo kingdom being big into slavery, they don't get into slavery until later on in the greater Yoruba wars that would take place after this period of time that the Dahomey is being talked about. But there's a conflict between Dahomey and the Yoruba land. Yoruba land is being invaded by the British, or by this time have been invaded by the British. This is the great burning of Benin and the robbing of Benin of all of its wealth and art and so forth that we hear about in history, but we don't connect it to nothing, right? But there's a greater Yoruba war going on between the people. And these boundaries called Nigeria, they're not there then, okay?
Right.
They're greater boundaries. People have other kinds of kingdom designs. And there's conflicts between some of these kingdoms, mostly around trade, okay? But you got something else happening at the same time. As the Muslim wars of genocide and ethnic cleansing is taking place in the Nile Valley with the Mamluk Turks and the Seljuk Turks, and then finally the Ottoman Turks by the 9th century and the end of the 9th century, beginning of the 10th century, they're pushing millions of people out of the Nile Valley into West Africa. Y'all hear what I'm saying? They're pushing millions of people out of the Nile Valley into West Africa, in through Chad, in through Cameroon, into Nigeria, down into Ghana. This population, through what is called Burkina Faso, this is the population of the people. Everybody always asks, what happened to the Egyptian? Well, we're talking to each other here right now, okay? Because a great number of those refugees, millions of refugees scattered to the south and to the west, because of the Turkish and the Arab ethnic cleansing that goes on for hundreds of years leading up to the 1400s, are caught as the vulnerable population in what becomes known as the transatlantic slave trade. And I know a lot of us don't go there with that piece, but you've got to understand, who are these people? And so the kingdoms like Dahomey on the coast, somebody coming from the north, that's the northeast, have brought captives that they want to sell. So another community, because they don't need that expansion in their population, and this group of captives was either hostile to them or refugees that they felt was taking their space away from them. Okay, and that population, most time, that refugee population was least able to defend itself, end up being caught in the trade. And it wasn't a trade at all. It was a war of genocide against African people. There was no transatlantic slave trade. Nobody was trading anything. People were being captured. People were being murdered. People were being raped. Villages were being burned to the ground. Okay? People were being slaughtered to get enough so you could make $200-300 in that day's money, which would be a couple of $1,000s in this day's money, or for one human being to do labor in the Western Hemisphere, where he was worked to death in 10 to 15 years and would be replaced with someone else. A process that went on for 400 years plus.
Exactly.
Dahomey got caught up in this, and what the movie shows, fictitious or not, they did do it. How do we get out of this? How do we work our way out, fight our way out of this contradiction? And I thought they did a beautiful job in describing the contradiction of the slave trade and describing the efforts of whatever African kingdom used that methodology to get out of the contradiction, whether it was Dahomey, Ashanti, Yoruba, Igbo, Manding, you know, we all
that dealt with selling the palm oil. That dealt with selling the palm. Okay. So at what point does in actual history, at what point does Dahomey get, so we know you have later, you're going to have the Franco-Dahomeyan Wars, 1890, 1894, and Dahomey is going to be absorbed into the, I guess you would say, French colonies.
Benin.
Dahomey's, Benin, yeah. Okay, so at what point does Dahomey stop selling African captives to the Europeans?
Well, they set the story in 1823, but
that's where it starts. Opens up 1823.
But that's not the real date. The date would be further back up. All right. If we were to look at that conflict played out, we'd probably be looking at Dahomey comes up as a kingdom in 1720.
20, right.
But you don't have power when you come into being. It takes you another 30, 40 years to build up an army, to build up a front, to build up a reputation. So Dahomey don't really get into the slave trade thing until around the they try to talk about the kingdom starting in the 1600s. That's the extension of the Oyo kingdom. That's not Dahomey yet. Dahomey comes into its being in 1720 or so. It gets involved near the end of the 1700s, around 1760 or so, in the slave trade process. And then it's out of it by 1750, completely, 1752, okay? But in that period of time, there's the conflicts and the wars, because the Portuguese are not sitting there with merchant, with banks and some money in their hand. They've come with armies with guns, all right? And they have people involved in this thing with weapons. And they've armed coastal people to go inland to capture other people for them. They've already depleted the coastal people they could take, but they need a coastal population because they need somebody who can speak the language, somebody who knows the terrain, somebody who knows the culture, etc. And they need numbers. And so they could take these captive people and make them their collaborators, though many of those people will resist them and betray them. That's why it's important to understand the history, because it's not a one look. You know?
Right.
You have to really see the intricacies of resistance and rebellion and death. It's just like most people come to North America and say, well, y'all never really freed yourself. Well, you never looked at our history to say that. There's recorded at least 300 plus African rebellions that was of significance in the United States, North America. But if you look at the Civil War, over 300,000 of us fought in uniform, and another 400,000 to 500,000 out of uniform, behind the line, being workers, being supporters, being the people who carrying the equipment. So nearly 500,000 plus of us is fighting in the Civil War to destroy the Confederacy, both from within and without. That's a war of liberation on our part.
Exactly. We fought to free ourselves. It wasn't given. Right. It wasn't Abraham Lincoln. We fought to free ourselves.
We killed millions of white people, okay? So y'all need to stop it and really see what happened here. And if you go back down to the British, we fought with the British. We said, we're going to give you freedom. In the North, we fought with the British in the South. And the British, the people who fought with the North, they end up in Nova Scotia and then Sierra Leone. Nobody ever asked for the largest part of that black population went, who was in the South. Because the largest part of the black population fighting against America was not in the North. And you know where that population went? To Jamaica and to Trinidad. Okay. And they started the Poker Man movement in Jamaica. Those black Geechee Gullah people who fought with the British. And in Trinidad, Tony Martin deals with this in his book, his last book, God Bless His Beautiful Soul, History of the Caribbean. he deals with the population that went to Trinidad, and I went to that community. And the streets are named after different military companies they fought in for the British. And when it was, so don't tell me, if you don't know history, you say we accepted this. But if you know history, there's hardly a week went by when some black folks wasn't rebelling in North America. Well, the same thing went on in Africa. It wouldn't a day go by where somebody wasn't killing an enemy, escaping from slavery, leading an army against the enslavers, putting up defense against enslavement, and that's all across the continent of Africa.
And here in the United States, especially other ways that we rebelled against slavery, learning to read and write was a way of rebelling against slavery. Mm-hmm. And one of the things many of us did when we learned to read and write, we wrote our own freedom papers and ran away also. Because oftentimes the slave patrollers, a lot of them were illiterate. That patrolled the roads, things like that. So you can give them
with a stamp on, and it was good to go.
Yep, you can say this is your freedom paper.
But the resistance movement in Africa was extraordinary because Africans didn't view human beings as commodities. That's culturally out of sync. Our worldview didn't work like that. You can't view Africa through European lenses. Otherwise, you're not going to even understand what resistance is. To take a human being's name from them, that's tantamount to slitting somebody's throat.
Right.
You don't take a human being's name. Your name is your ancestral lineage tag. Takes you back to God.
Right.
And so if you just look at the African concept of being human, it didn't allow for chattel slavery to be a part of their consciousness. And even those who got involved in that selling people as commodity, like for that period in Dahomey and that period in Ashanti, and maybe some other places as well, one thing you will see for sure, they knew nothing about chattel slavery. They had not been on a ship coming to America. Not a single one of them owned a slave ship. All right? They didn't control the armies that was controlling the shores of Africa. These were all white foreigners with guns. They didn't own a single plantation in America or the Caribbean or Central South America. So let's stop giving ourselves excuses for why we can't look in the mirror and love ourselves. Because let me tell you what a lot of this is. This resistance is self-hate.
Correct.
And someone is trying to say, stop hating yourself, but hating me felt so good. So it's hard to stop. You know what I'm saying? And I'm saying, stop hating yourself. Take this tool. No, this movie is not perfect. It's not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of our problems about the slave trade or history. But guess what? You watch movies all the time and you enjoy them. And most of them are nonsensical. Most of them disrespectful to black people, disrespectful to things African and our spiritual system, and you enjoy them. This one fight to be the opposite of all of that. Go in and enjoy it. I guarantee you'll come back and call Brother Michael. So, Brother Michael, thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Because I saw some black technicians and some black directors and some black actors and actresses, and they put on a beautiful, fictitious performance inspired by the history of our people, about our women who were extraordinary warriors. And see, the thing is, these women were considered by the whole world that found out about them to be the most extraordinary of extraordinaries.
Right.
It ain't that they didn't exist. They exist. And the little piece of them that we see in this film that talk about their principles, their integrity, their dignity, their training, their devotion, their loyalty to their nation and their king, that's just a tiny bit of who they really were.
Right.
Because if we did not have these women, we would not have the woman who raised Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was one of these women in Haiti to give us the Haitian Revolution victory.
Yes.
One of these women.
Yes.
from the Dahomey army who raised Jean-Jacques Dessalines. And my sister, Ezele Danto, is trying to get a piece out here. She's calling it the Dadas. It's about some of these women.
Yeah, I know her.
And
Danto, I know her.
Yeah, she's an extraordinary sister. The Free Haiti movement is what she's the head of. And these women, many of whom was a part of that fighting force, who've now been captured and sold into Haiti by the French, they've gotten old, broken down, can't have sex no more, they can't be abused no more, they can't work in the field no more. So the Catholic Church takes them, according to Ezele Danto, these ladies they call the Dadat, and they put them in a church lay organization to convert other young African enslaved women to Catholicism. But instead, these very ladies, these former warriors, train the leadership that become the women leadership in the Haitian Revolution.
Right.
And many of the women they trained marry the very generals we see as the heroes in the Haitian Revolution. This thing is bigger than you think it is, brothers and sisters. It's
exactly.
than you think it is.
Right.
So study. If this movie does nothing else but make you pick up a book, grab a DVD and start studying, listening to Brother Carver, Dr. Jeffries, Dr. Clark, Dr. Jacob Rogers, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Amos Wilson, going back to your brother in England with When We Ruled.
Robin Walker. Walker. I got his book right behind me, Robin Walker.
And
brilliant brother.
See that we have an extraordinary history. We did not give up. Otherwise, we would still be in slavery.
Right.
We fought every single day from one end of Africa to the other, from one end of the Caribbean to the other, from one end of Central South America to the other, from one end of North America to the other. And we've transformed the white world. And what's so beautiful about Viola and her husband and that beautiful director and the others, they took the content and white intent and transformed white content to an African intent that made sense. They interpreted it in a way that they took the intent of someone else's content being the writing that was done. And all content has intent.
Right.
And so I'm just assuming, given history, what the intent might have been, even if it wasn't deliberate, just culturally. And I know these Black folks took that content and redirected that intent to give us a cinematic document that I think is rather extraordinary.
Okay, we're going to come back to that point in just a second. I want to go to this clip here. This is an excerpt of the interview that Viola Davis did on Good Morning America, because this gets deeper into it, and she talks more about making the film. Before that, we don't want to forget the sisters. We mentioned a number of brothers that are scholars. So Sister Nubia Wardford from here in Detroit, Nubia Marinke, she's watching as well. She just saw the movie. You know, Sister Nubia, she just saw the movie. She had extraordinary production, but also sisters like ancestors like Dr. Francis Cress Wilson and Dr. Patricia Newton. You've got, we have Dr. Marimba Ani, okay, who wrote Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. We have sister teaches the Meta Netter. I know her. It'll come to me. Ricchetti. Dr. Ricchetti, Amen.
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Ricchetti, Amen. So we have the sisters also, Dr. Talitha LaFloria, whose book is behind me, Dr. Dani Ramey Berry, Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar. So we have the sisters also. Oh, yeah. Okay, those watching, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, and also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, and visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. We have the information there, and my online classes. You can support us there also. How can people support you, Professor Small?
Well, always, $, Cash App, Dr. James Small.
Okay, I'm going to put that up here also.
Yeah,
but you're going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sister Nubia, and And how you doing, my beautiful sister, who's a heck of a historian,
yes,
politics archaeologist, doing research in Sudan, but the rest of us are even scared to go. You know, and she said it is correct that only 4% of Africans across the continent were involved in the slave trade versus 96% Arab and European. And people need to know that. So if you think that 4% is big, just look at what percentage of the Black community sell drugs in the Black community, right, to you every day. That's worse than any kind of slave trade. So yes, you will have people who are weak. Yes, you will have people who will fall. But let's not talk about the weak. Let's talk about the strong. And what this movie shows is what a strong African woman looked like. Miss Viola, girl, every step you took in this movie made the earth shake. Okay? And the young lady, who's the young lady that played her daughter?
Mbedu Thesu, I think is her name. She's from South Africa. She's from South Africa. Yes. She was brilliant. And the sister who played her big sister who died and saving her life, she was brilliant with the way she brought this sisterhood concept, motherhood concept of adopting the orphan, bringing you into the family, taking care of you now. That piece that I grew up in on the plantation in South Carolina, that Africa, with so many of us grew up in Mississippi and Alabama and Arkansas and Louisiana and Texas. Let's stop forgetting, because we brought Africa right here with us and we behaved in a certain way. What made you think we behaved any differently at home? Right, exactly. Exactly. It was Thusu Mbedu. She played Nawi, Viola Davis's daughter. Give us your Cash App again so I can put it up here, Professor Small. What's your Cash App again? $, Dr. James Small. Okay, Dr. James Small. Okay, we'll put that up here so you all can support Professor Small also. Okay, I want to go to I want to play a little excerpt of this interview. Viola Davis was on Good Morning America on September 13th, 2022, and let's go to this clip here.
It's a movement. This is so much more than just a movie, and you even talked about it being so important to you, and just that zenith for you.
That sort of magnum opus, I call it. Yeah. I think the same reaction that you have as an audience is the reason why I did the movie. First of all, it is a movie that's led by women. And it's a movie that's led by Black women. And it's a movie that's led by dark-skinned Black women. There is no white savior, you know, and it's women who are warriors, tapping into not only their physical strength, but also when you see the movie, they're humanized. And so, when have you seen that? I remember someone online said, I'm tired of seeing dark-skinned Black women as just strong and fighting and masculine. And I was like, when have you ever seen that? Really? Tell me. We do now. We do now.
And what a cast you've put together to tell this story.
Absolutely. Thuso Bedu, Lashana Lynch, Sheila Etim, you know, Adrian Warren, who was in Tina Turner, you know, as well as Sia, Shioma, Jamie Lawson, women who are beyond brilliant. But also, I mean, women who are playing roles of Agojie warriors that literally, it could have been an action film. But when they walked in, you see people. You see humans. And I think that's what shifts.
You bring out the best in people because the critics are saying this cast, everyone in every single role, the best.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, here's the thing. You know, as a woman, you're taught that being a girl and being feminine is not about tapping into your physical strength. It's about being demure, speaking in a high voice, being polite all the time. Whereas the challenge of, the reason why I loved it so much is my body served me. And it was, I had to do 5 hours of weightlifting and martial arts every day.
Was that all new for you?
Wait, but you did have martial arts.
you did weightlifting, you did sprinting, you did weapons training, but you had to take a DNA test.
DNA test, which I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see I'm lactose intolerant. I have a high-rated injury. I said I can't eat sugar. I mean, and I had to keep telling Gina, Prince-Bythewood, great director. I had to keep calling her and say, Gina, listen to me now. You know I'm 56. You know if I get on that treadmill at 9.4, I lose oxygen. If I'm at 9.4, I could die of a heart attack, Gina. These girls are 30 years old. Gina, you got to do something else. You got to do something else, Gina. You're going to have a dead warrior here.
Let's give everybody a look.
All right.
No wonder.
Okay, so that's an excerpt of a great interview that Viola Davis did on Good Morning America. That's on the Good Morning America's YouTube channel. That's from September 13th, 2022. Okay, any comments on that before I go to the next topic?
No, I think she said it all. I mean, this is Black women having an opportunity to interpret their racial history, and at the same time to interpret the role that Black women have played in history, are playing in history, and could play in history.
Right.
You know, when we look at the civil rights movement in America, from top to bottom, there's that Black woman. You know, when Marcus Garvey goes to prison, he leaves Henrietta Benton Davis in charge of UNIA, and that's some brother. When Malcolm X goes overseas, he leaves a woman in charge of OAU. When Malcolm X died, his sister Ella becomes the president of OAU. When the youth was trained to do the bus rides in the South, these were Black women who organized that bus ride into the South and trained them into nonviolent tactics. You know, whether you ever look at civil rights leaders marching with Dr. King and others, you see all those Black women right there marching. You see Sister Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi, the most terrorist state in America at the time, who had been abused and raped in prison and beaten in all kinds of ways.
She was sterilized also.
You know, and forcing the Democratic Party convention to come to a halt. Nothing like that had ever happened in the history of America at the convention in Jersey. This Black woman had been fierce throughout our history. She is our mother. And any foolish man would get caught up in some white dialectic foolishness and not understand your mama, your wife, your daughter, your sister, and you're caught up in some female demeaning, minimizing process. You know something's wrong with you, so go on and fix yourself.
Exactly. So before I played that clip, you were talking about the difference between the content and the intent.
Right. The
content and the intent. Talk about that, because we discussed that earlier today, and you talked about the two white female writers, Maria Bello and the other one, their intent, and then what Viola Davis and her husband Julius Tennant were able to do. Talk about that, please.
Right. Having worked on the film, I've seen some of the best writers who are well-meaning people who have done good research, and they're trying to write a Black story, but they don't come from our culture. They don't come from our value system.
So these are not African Americans. These may be white, other ethnic groups. Right. Just to be clear. Okay.
Right. They don't have our worldview.
Right.
And they're trying to tell the story. And what they end up writing is their content about us. But that content comes with an intent based on their value system and their worldview. And so I could see where Miss Davis and her husband would have to look at that content, analyze its intent, and then use the knowledge of being an African to take that content and alter its intent. You see, and the way we see the design. And you know, I can be critical, Michael, because when we first started, I'd get ready to beat up on Sister Viola And
right.
I'd me back, Brother Small. You need to go watch it, Brother Small. And I watched it. And I
told Professor Kaba the same thing.
Yeah.
Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, I told him the same thing.
I saw the work, and I know what they had to go through to accomplish the work. I know our history, because like you, I'm wrapped in history. That's my thing. I am history, you know, and I know the culture. Like if you look over my shoulder, you see Shango, the big guy standing there with all of my electors around his neck. Next to Shango is my mother, Oya. Above Oya is the head of the Benin prince that the European captured and don't want to give us back that head. Sitting at the bottom is the Ashanti god, because I go nowhere without them. I immerse myself in the philosophy that surrounds them. And so, like Viola was talking about how she had to get in shape and to do this movie, because you could see it was very challenging physically. But you could see them meeting the challenge. And African culture, when you're trying to take the content written even by Africans themselves, because you got to remember, colonization and slavery have altered our consciousness to such a degree that much of our content have the wrong intent because of value system and worldview. And if you want to bring a message to really talk about taking content and creating an intent that will bring a message that will show, even in fiction, the possibility of what the history of a people could have been and should have been, they had a job cut out for them, and they met the challenge.
Yes,
they met.
I definitely agree. I definitely agree with that. People talk of one of the things that I see on social media and in the media in general, and also this came up. So this movie comes out right after Queen Elizabeth II dies, and then a lot of information comes out with the British involvement in not just the transatlantic slave trade, but in colonizing little more than 25% of the world population. Okay. So some people say things like, well, the British abolished the international transatlantic slave trade in 1807, and Dahomey didn't want to abolish it, or the British did the right thing, or they try to make the British out to be saints or something like that. And it's like, wait a second, they got involved in 1562, okay, and they didn't. And in 1807, when they passed the Slavery Abolition Act, that just dealt with bringing Africans into their British colonies. It was still legal to have slavery in the British colonies. They didn't end that to 1834.
Yeah, they didn't end slavery.
Talk about that.
Right.
Yes.
The British did not end slavery. What the British did was to interrupt the competition. Slavery produced for Britain the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But now those who had free labor was challenging the wealth of the Industrial Revolution. So Britain replaced its labor population with the Irish and the Scots who they were occupying, who they had colonized in the British Isles. People don't even go back there. The Irish and the Scots, this was their land. British people we call British people, these are Germans, Anglo and Saxons who invaded these people. All right? Right. And so now they realize in order to make the money, they had already made all the money. All of the wealth that undergirds the Industrial Revolution in Britain comes from the transatlantic slave trade. All of that. Right. They had no wealth before that of any significance. Okay. Right. And so now they had that wealth. They wanted to move in another direction in terms of wealth building and wealth creation. But that was being challenged by these other states who was getting the wealth from slavery, from the slave trade. So France, who was the competition, Denmark, who was the competition, Spain, a competition, Portugal and Germany. Britain had to find a way to minimize their ability to use wealth from the transatlantic slave trade to challenge British hegemony over the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. Do y'all hear what I'm saying?
Yes.
You get it? Okay?
Yes.
So they trade chattel slavery for wage slavery on the Irish and Scots.
The Irish and the Scots.
And then at the same time, they want to minimize the French developing their industrialization, and minimize the Portuguese and the Spanish developing their industrialization. But to do that, you've got to then do what they went out there with ships and said, and they only have 3 ships out there. 3 ships that can patrol the whole Atlantic Ocean. Give me a break, okay? So they went out there with ships and said, we're going to block you from trading, making money off the slave trade, because that's going to make you wealthy enough to compete with us in this new industrial direction we're going in. And we're going to say we're doing something for humanity. But at the meantime, they still got people enslaved, not just in Britain itself, but in all the British colonies around the world.
Well, now we're going to take it a step further, and then I want to just show briefly some information dealing with the Industrial Revolution, because I do a whole presentation dealing with the African American origins or African American roots of Labor Day history, and this goes back into the origins of the Industrial Revolution, starting in the 1790s in Manchester, England, and a lot of the cotton that was being produced at that time was produced by African slave labor. So when we look at it, people can read this article here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but read this article. It's a fact check. It's from USA Today. I've talked about it before in the African History Network show. This deals with United Kingdom finished paying off debts to slave-owning families in 2015, which they did. They had to take out a loan to pay. Now, what happened was when they abolished, finally abolished slavery in 1834 in their colonies, Britain pays 46,000 British slave owners. They paid them reparations. It's about 19 million pounds. I don't know what that translates to in dollars. It was about 19 million pounds. Okay. And then they take out a loan to pay them. They just finished really paying off that loan and the interest, things like that in 2015. But this section here in the article, in total, about 3.5 million African people were transported to British colonies across the Americas and Caribbean, though only 2.75 million survived the harrowing Middle Passage in the confines of slave ships across the ocean. So you would think the way a lot of this stuff is floating around, Professor Small, you would think it was Dahomey that sold 3.1 million Africans.
Right.
The British get left off the hook. They get let off the hook.
And that's why it's important for people to go watch this movie, because Dahomey is simply prototypical of African resistance. The movie. This could have happened anywhere in Africa, because it did happen everywhere in Africa.
Right.
Let me say it again. This could have happened anywhere in Africa, because this type of resistance happened everywhere in Africa. You know?
Yes, the resistance happened everywhere in Africa, and then also a lot of African ethnic groups, nations were given an ultimatum by Europeans: either you provide us with African captives, or we're going to take you also. Because the Europeans are coming with the.
They had a military presence stationed on the shore. That's what slave dungeons were. Slave dungeons were forts that housed their military with their cannons and their armament that they could come up with on any given day and wipe you out, which they did on many occasions.
Right.
So let's study the thing and understand it. I want my brothers and sisters, especially African Americans, stop being cowards about learning your history. Don't come tell me about the baseball game, the football game, and the basketball game, and who's got a girlfriend, who's got a boyfriend, what's this one stat, and what's this, and none of that takes any money home to your pocket. None of that transform your consciousness and allow you to be a better person so you can raise your children in a safer world. History does that for you. History gives you a worldview. History gives you a perspective on your daily reality. History tells you who your friends and enemy has been and who your friends and enemies are today. Instead of you looking at yourself and hating yourself, hate the person that destroyed the image of yourself while you're restoring that image to yourself. And this takes study, but you don't have to study hard. I've got at least 100 tapes on YouTube. Just go listen to Brother Small. Ain't gonna cost you nothing. You know what I'm saying? Go to Michael Imhotep's education channel. Tune into his classes. Tune into Baba Kamba's classes. Tune into Dr. Ma'at,
Yeah.
She will blow you away,
Right.
And you'll realize that people say, well, where do I go to get the history? Just turn on your computer. You don't turn on your computer. Turn on your cell phone. All of us is all over your cell phone. Okay.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I created the African History Network in 2010 to provide that information. Absolutely. Very quickly here, and then we're going to wrap up. And I want you to let people know. I want you to give people your website and tell people about your courses coming up, anything like that as well. But very quickly, we talked about the Industrial Revolution. Now, this comes from the BBC. This is part of my presentation that I do dealing with the origins of the Labor Day holiday. This is from bbc.co.uk, and they have a lot of documentation on all this, the BBC. Slave trade and the British economy. British profits were made from exporting manufacturing goods to Africa and importing products of enslaved labor, such as sugar. Ports such as Glasgow, Bristol, and Liverpool, England, where the Beatles were from, and Liverpool prospered as a result of the slave trade. So they go through and they have all these charts and things like this, but there's a portion here dealing with cotton that I just want to focus in on, and I want to see if I can get to this. Okay, they talk about this. I can't. Let me see which page is this on. They have these slides here. Which one is this? Okay, this is 3. The role of the trade in navigation. And okay, this deals with manufacturing. So this one right here shows economic growth and the Industrial Revolution. Many historians describe the Industrial Revolution as a process rather than as an event. The part that exports played can be shown as a virtuous circle. So exports grow, industry grows, business owners invest and look for better machines. Machines get better, products get cheaper. Exports grow, you have this cycle.
They were trying to corner the market when they did this thing of blockading the slave trade. Because they were trying to corner the market and the Industrial Revolution development and did not want the competition from the French, the Germans, Spanish, and the others. But you can't do that unless you take away how they're making their money. You understand? They don't abolish slavery now. They said they're abolishing the slave trade. So they're interdicting these ships. But that is to knock the competition out of the game. And in the meantime, they take the African knowledge of how to make steel and become the premier steel makers in the world, right? And so the guy who founds Chase Bank, right, gets trained by the House of Rothschild, sent deliberately over to England because America was using the steel from Britain to build the railroads to bring the cotton to the market to feed the British cotton industry, textile industry. And so so what they began to do in America was, instead of, even though they were still bringing us in on ships and beating the blockade, they began to breed us over here.
Right. Instead of after 1807, because the U.S. March 2nd, 1807, the U.S. Congress passes a bill to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade. The U.S. involved,
but not abolish
that goes
slavery.
Into effect. No, I understand.
Right.
Trust me, I understand. That goes into effect January 1st, 1808.
Yes.
Okay. That's based upon Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution that stipulated the earliest that the international transatlantic slave trade could be abolished was 1808. That means bringing Africans into this country to enslave them. So all the now here's the thing. They kept doing
that is to knock out because America and Britain are partners in this. So they want to knock out the competition, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Brandenburgs, the Dutch. And by cutting that off from them, they're
cutting off the supply.
Right. They're cutting off the supply. And in America, where they had a large enough piece of territory and a large enough black population, they could go into the breeding process. And that's what they did. Right.
And what they did was it also increased the value of the African slaves that are already here, because you're cutting off the supply as well. Now the other thing is, even though it was illegal after January 1st, 1808, they kept bringing Africans in.
Right until the 1860s. Right up to the
when the Clotilda comes in, right? So all the Africans,
the one we know about.
Right. That's the last known slave ship we know about.
Yeah.
And that was because of a bet. Timothy Mayer was the white wealthy businessman who made a bet that he can smuggle Africans into the country. But one of the points I want to make, all the Africans that were brought to this country from January 1st, 1808 through July of 1860, when the Clotilda comes in, all that was illegal based upon federal law.
Right.
Okay. So that helps to lay a legal foundation, not a moral foundation, but a legal foundation for reparations, because Europeans violated federal law. Also, there was a tax up to $10 paid for each African that was smuggled, that was brought to the country illegally as well. That's stipulated in the Constitution. Okay. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1. Now, and when we look at the U.S. Supreme Court case of the Amistad, the United States versus the Amistad, those Africans, when their freedom, Joseph St. Q and those other Africans on the Amistad slave ship, they win their freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court, because the U.S. Supreme Court rules that it violated international treaties for those Africans to be captured. It was illegal for them to be brought into the country because the international transatlantic slave trade was abolished, and they were given their freedom. Okay, so this is why we have to understand history and law, and use this. Go ahead.
From the very inception of the nation, slavery was legal. It was a part of American law. America is completely culpable as a nation state.
Yes.
For the crimes against humanity committed against African peoples in the United States of America.
Right.
That's why they keep playing so many games. That's why I got to thank Sister Viola and thank her husband and thank our sister who was the director. Listen, y'all just broke through a brick wall. Okay, you knocked the whole wall down. You know, Black Panther did a good job in cracking that wall, but you just knocked the wall down, because what you showed about Dahomey, and people can scream all they want about they sold us into slavery. You need to get on the ship, get on the plane, go to Africa. If you can go anywhere else on vacation, I see some of y'all going to Paris. That's cool. I've been to Paris. You know what I'm saying? I've been to London and so forth, and Bristol and Liverpool and Leeds and Leicester and all of that stuff. But I've been to Africa, and I've listened to the elders. They still tell you the story of what they did. You can actually go to Benin, go to Dahomey, go to the very palace you see in the movie, and sit there, and the griots will tell you this history.
Right.
If you really want to know it. And the white folks is trying to say, oh, this little group of Black folks stole all of these millions of please.
Exactly.
So let's tell the real story, and let's put the whole picture. Let's put Islam in there. I'm sorry to Salam Alaikum brothers. I was a Salam Alaikum brother too, I understand. But that's not our religion. That was imposed on us just like Christianity. And many of the brothers, and to make it worse, many of the Arab Muslims were selling the Black Muslims. There was actually a war in Africa between white Muslims and Black Muslims. And that's how a lot of us got sold into the slave trade. And you will find that a large percentage of Black Muslims were sold into the United States of America by the white Muslims. Not some indigenous African in Dahomey. Okay?
Right. So because I know there was you had the Indian Ocean slave trade with the Portuguese and the Arabs.
I'm talking about, there's a whole concept dealing with the jihads of the 1700s and the 1800s, with the raiding down, once the Ottoman Turks crush the Fatimite dynasty at the end of the 9th century and takes over Islam worldwide, the Ottoman went to war against Africa. This is what destroys Ghana, the ancient Ghana kingdom, and the Mali and Songhai. It is the white Muslims declaring war on the Black Muslims and selling us into slavery to the Portuguese and the Dutch. Right. We don't even talk about that because we have such sympathy for Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam and Islam, but we need to talk about that.
Yes. That and because that deals with El Mansur of Morocco invading Shanghai in 1591. That right there. And one of the things, and Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay talks about this in like the book Golden Age of the Moors, a fantastic book edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. But Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay, who has an essay in that book, along with Renoko Rashidi.
That's the beginning of it. The jihads of the 1800s, and is where you really see the explosion of this. Right. Coming down through Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana. You know, that's how the Ashanti gets involved in this thing, because they're fighting with the kingdoms of the Arabized, Islamized kingdoms in northern Ghana, encroaching on the hinterland of Ashanti. Okay, and the Ashanti is selling their prisoners of war, captured in that conflict. The same thing with the Mose people of what is now Burkina Faso. Mose being an indigenous population, but fighting with the Islamic encroachment on what became Upper Volta and later this. You see the same thing in Cote d'Ivoire, with the Akan people of Cote d'Ivoire, having another ethnic nation having to fight this Islamic horde coming from the north. And of course, a lot of them end up being black because they're being converted the same way we're being converted to Christianity. But this is the Turkish Ottoman Empire and the Eastern Arab empires. And we don't even discuss it. And you're not going to understand West African transatlantic slave trade unless you know about the Sahara and the Indian Ocean and the East African Islamic slave trade that comes right down into the Western Sudan.
Right, because that goes back to about 8th century.
The Great Jihads.
The Great Jihad. Okay. Let me just show this quickly, and we're going to wrap up. I want to go back to this. I was able to find what I was looking for. So this is dealing with the slave trade and the British economy. This is dealing with the Industrial Revolution. This talks about, this section talks specifically about cotton. Okay. From 1750 onwards, a new industry emerged in Britain, the production of cotton cloth. Wool production had previously been Britain's major industry, but cotton had one key advantage: machinery is better than wool. And then 1793, you have the cotton gin invented here in the U.S., and then you're going to have copies of the cotton gin, which reduces the cost to producing cotton. As a result, it was cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began. As a result, it was in cotton production that the Industrial Revolution began, particularly in and around Manchester, England. The cotton was used was mostly imported from slave plantations. Slavery provided the raw material for industrial change and growth. So when we talk about this Industrial Revolution, the foundation of that was the cotton that African slaves grew. Go ahead, Professor Small.
Well, no, you just laid it out. And the thing that people must understand is that the American banking system was tied in to the British banking system. Full partnership.
Yes. J.P.
Morgan Chase comes out of a tutelage by the House of Rothschild in London. Okay. And they were involved in selling the steel to America, right? To create the rail lines to move the cotton to the docks, put on the ships to send to England. Okay. All tied up, all wrapped up in one neat package. And so when they talk about they were blockading Africa to stop the slave trade, yeah, they were trying to knock out their competition in the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
Let's get it straight.
Yep. And everybody, you can this other article here you can check out. I showed it on the screen briefly. I didn't give the name of it. This is a really good article. This is from SmithsonianMag.com, Smithsonian Institute. This deals with the real warriors behind the Woman King, the real warriors behind the Woman King, September 15, 2022. And goes through, I printed out all these articles I print out. I have thousands of articles printed out. So it goes through all this history, and it deals with where the movie opens in 1823 also. Okay, because it talks about right here, it opens in 1823 with a successful raid by the Agojie, who freed captives from the enslavement from the clutches of the oil empire and powerful Yoruba state. Okay, so it starts with the opening of the movie. Okay, Professor Small, look, we're going to wrap up here. Once again, I know I've taken one of your online classes you taught a few years ago, and I think it was dealing with the Yoruba, some of the Ifa, things like this. So give people your website address. Let people know about how they can support you, DVD lectures, courses that you offer, things like that.
Yeah, well, right now you can go to my website, ProfessorJamesSmall.com. Then my Facebook page, which is very popular, is ProfessorSmallAfricanWorld.com. Facebook is messing with me for some reason for the last 2 weeks, but I've been too busy to deal with them. I don't know what I said that got them upset. They're blocking all my pages and stuff. But I'll get it sure when I get time to deal with them. But you go to my website, and then my email is amponsa3@gmail.com. amponsa3@gmail.com. I will be starting classes again, starting at the beginning of 2023. I want to finish this Godfather of Harlem piece, which we should be finished at the end of October. It should be coming out the first week in January. It's better than the last two by 100 miles. You're gonna love it, right? Because we got more courage, we got braver. You're gonna see a Nestor Che Guevara. You're gonna see a Che Guevara and Malcolm. You're gonna see the CIA trying to kill both of them. You're gonna see the FBI plotting Malcolm's assassination. I put it all out there. We're gonna.
And you, as the historical consultant, you go through and you review the script. You let them know, okay, it didn't happen this way. This is not realistic. Things like that. That's your job on the show. Because at the end of each show, when you watch the credits, your name is in the credits. Go ahead.
Right. So I work with some brothers, Chris Brancato, who is the showrunner and the chief writer. I mean, beautiful guy, and Michael and Paul, who's a brother out in California. We consult on concepts, ideas, and principles. Like, how does this concept look? Like right now, here's what we're doing. We're trying to figure out how do we do the assassination without replicating Spike Lee or replicating other movies about the assassination. I can't tell you what we're going to do, but it's going to be very unique, and we're not going to see. And my thing was, I don't want to see him getting shot. How do we handle that?
Right.
How the writers handle it is just beautiful, right? But still tell the story as accurately as you can, right?
Exactly.
You keep the dignity of Sister Betty and the children and the family, you know. Showing Malcolm as a diplomat. We've got him in Mecca, all right? We've got him in Ghana giving a speech, and we got him in Cairo speaking to. All that's going to be up in there. We got a meeting with Che Guevara. You know, we've got a meeting with Kwame Nkrumah. So you're going to see stuff that no one else has shown. Okay. And then we got this relationship between him and Bumpy Johnson, his friend, trying to keep him alive and trying to protect him. Then we bring the CIA into play through the Cuban drug lords, right, into Harlem. And then we get the FBI coming in, wanting to stop Malcolm. But see, that gets hidden in other pieces. They talk about the Nation of Islam, but they don't talk about these other forces. So we're going to deal with the other forces big time out front.
You know, I deal with this in my classes. There's a good article, and you just hit on a little bit of this. There's a good article by Deneen L. Brown for the Washington Post. It deals with the day Dr. King met Malcolm X, March 26, 1964, at the U.S. Senate debate for the Civil Rights Act. Martin Luther King Jr. met Malcolm X just once. The photo still haunts us with what was lost. But what I want to hit on very quickly.
Down in Selma in the movie, we got him doing the speech in Selma. We got a meeting with Andy Young. We got a meeting with Coretta. We're going to tell the story hard.
Well, Malcolm gets in. What I was going to hit on, when Malcolm officially separates from the Nation of Islam, March 8, 1964, Malcolm gets involved in the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
Okay. And that's a part of Malcolm's life that's not talked about a lot. You got to do some research to understand this. You can't just quote excerpts of Malcolm's speeches. And Malcolm, the Battle of the Bullet that he first delivers that I know of, March 29th, 1964, in Washington Heights, New York. One of the things he's talking about in the speech is interjecting Black nationalism into the civil rights movement.
Right.
Okay.
He actually has a meeting in 65 and Ruby Dee's brother's Tom's house in Queens. And he meets with all of the civil rights leaders. The only one that didn't make it was Dr. King, but
Dr. King, right.
He sent his rep.
All right.
And they agreed that they would work together. And Fannie Mahima, who was at that meeting, invites him to come to Mississippi, a lecture that would have taken place of 2 weeks after he was assassinated.
Right. In the documentary, Make It Plain, they talk about that, but they said it was at Juanita Portier's house.
No, it was Tom's house.
Tom's house? Okay.
Tom's house.
And what was his relation to Ruby Dee?
His brother. That's Ruby Dee's brother.
Ruby Dee's brother. Okay. Agojie Davis's wife, and Ruby Dee.
They were very close to Malcolm, that whole family.
Right.
So
exactly.
Belafonte, of course. He was,
right.
Those men were.
Because they had this meeting. They had this meeting with the major civil rights leaders and Malcolm, so they could put all their differences out on the table and work together. That's basically what the meeting.
And this is what forced Hoover to get more aggressive towards Malcolm's removal. Hoover, if you think he had an issue with Dr. King being a Messiah, now Malcolm and Dr. King talking about uniting, this guy's obviously gone crazy in D.C. at this time.
Right.
And that's when he gave that order, do something about him. Well, you can't buy him. He won't take your money. You can't frighten him. What does do something about Malcolm X mean?
Right. This is what I was getting at. When they met, they only met for a couple of minutes. When they met, Malcolm told Dr. King, I'm throwing myself into the heart of the civil rights struggle. This is what Malcolm was doing. And one of the things that Malcolm talked about in the Battle of the Bullet is registering African Americans in Harlem to vote as independents. And he's going through talking about the importance of understanding politics and getting involved politically. And then June 28, 1964, when he delivers his speech announcing the formation of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the speech that people call By Any Means Necessary. He lays out this 5-point platform, and he talks about voter registration in there. He talks about economics, of course, and education, but he talks about political engagement and voter registration as well. And understanding how to leverage
that was not new with Malcolm, because when he was still in the nation, he was trying to work with the Freedom Now Party, but the messenger stopped it. So he always been trying to have that kind of engagement, but the nation wanted to remain a religious organization and not a political organization. That was part of the conflict that got him separated from the nation.
Exactly. And, July 31st, 1963, Malcolm sends a letter. He's in the Nation of Islam. He sends a letter to the leading civil rights organizers, including Dr. King, and he's requesting a meeting with them that's going to take place in Harlem, New York. I think it was August of 67, right around that time, August of 63. And Malcolm was calling for a unification of the civil rights leaders and their followers. He said that we have to find a common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. This is what Malcolm was doing while he's in the nation. He's calling for unification of the civil rights leaders and their followers. He's saying that we should be able to submerge our minor differences, the Negro leaders submerge our minor differences to find a common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. And this is what we need to do today, brother.
Yeah. And so when you read that, I wish you'd send me that article. I like to take it to the
I'll send it to you. I've got thousands of articles, Professor Small. Seriously, I'll send this to you.
Right around those issues right now. And see, when you see that, then you understand why the split with the nation. You see the hand of COINTELPRO.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
COINTELPRO is well at work in the nation at this time. And the one thing they want to do is destroy the partnership between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. And they were able to effectively do that in November 63. And once they got him out, they went to work to make sure they could never get back together. And then as Malcolm slides, as he does, to move in partner with Dr. King, they killed him.
Yep. Exactly. Well, look, brother, it's been fantastic. People have learned so much. Everybody support Professor James Small and support the African History Network again. Here's his website, ProfessorJamesSmall.com, ProfessorJamesSmall.com. And then his Cash App also is $ Dr. James Small, $, Dr. James Small. And then be sure to support the African History Network as well. Well, look, brother, it's been fantastic. I know you got to run.
Let's go ahead. Come back and call out The Woman King. That's why we came together. And people should go and watch it. It's an extraordinary document. It's a good movie if you just want to be entertained with some really fantastic acting. But if you want to have your African melanin stimulated, this will do it. I guarantee.
Absolutely. You know? You'll come away blown away by this movie. You'll come away wanting to learn more about African history and who you are. That's what happened with Malik. That's so powerful. I'm going to do my DNA sometime. So I'm going to use African ancestry.
Yeah, I did African ancestry. I did my mitochondria, which is my grandma, and that's 100% Sierra Leone. But I knew my great grandma who came from West Africa, and I knew my great grandpa, my great grandpa who came from East Africa on my grandma's side. She was the root woman, the Yoruba priestess, the Dada, and the plantation I grew up on. So it's just so much of it is like, wow. I mean, like I said, I don't cry in movies. These people had me crying. I mean, the tears.
Me too. I shed some tears at the end too.
It was like I almost lost my breath a couple of times. And stunning the way they did the essays and solve the conflict resolutions they brought about with the situations that was clear, the problems, how they solved the problems. Let me explain to people what I'm saying. When you're making a movie, you create problems, you create contradictions, and the movie is about how you bring resolution to the contradictions, right? They just do a fantastic job of it.
Exactly.
And Miss Davis is just, when you see her, she is the woman king. When you see her, she is the warrior general leader. No doubt about it.
Naniska. Yep. And Naniska was a real Agojie, but she wasn't a general. So I listened to an interview. I've listened to a number of interviews that Gina Prince-Bythewood, the director, has done, as well as Viola Davis. And Gina Prince-Bythewood said that the character of Naniska was an amalgamation. It's a combination of different Agojie.
Heroine and heroes, when you dealing with fictionalized history, it is an amalgamation of multiple characters. And that's how you make it work. And they made it work because, like I said, this could have happened anywhere in Africa, and it did happen in multiple places in Africa. And so if you want something to, and people are upset and saying, oh, this is fiction, then go study the history and tell me the story.
Study the real history. Yep. That's why we're doing this show, that deal with the real history, because what happens is movies that have a historical foundation, but a lot of fiction in them, it causes people to want to know more about the real history. That's why I'm doing this show. That's why I contacted Professor Small. I contacted Sylvian Diop, who wrote Fighting the Slave Trade. I'm trying to get in touch with her. I talked to Dr. Talitha LaFloria, who wrote, who's the author of this book here. We've had her on the show before. Chained in Silence, Black Women and Convict Labor in the New South. Dr. Talitha LaFloria. We've had her here on the African History Network show before. Yeah. And she had not seen the movie yet. She wants to see it. So I'm going to try to get her on. We're going to try to get some sister scholars on also as well.
This
okay, brother. Look, go ahead.
Good work to the whole crew.
Yeah.
And what they've done is raise the bar in terms of the kind of pieces that will now be presented to the Black community about our history. And if they don't give her the Academy Award, I'm going to have to suit up and boot up and go out to Hollywood and handle it.
She deserves it. Absolutely. And you know, director Gina Prince-Bythewood, she credits the success of the film Black Panther for opening the door for this movie to be funded. This has a $50 million budget. She credits the film Black Panther because Black Panther did 1.3 billion worldwide, #1 movie for 5 weeks in a row. She credits the success of that movie for being able to open the door for them to be able to do this movie. Okay, so that's powerful. Well, look, brother, I know you got to run. Sir. So thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule, man. We'll talk soon, and we'll talk about your classes.
Okay,
also,
Brother Michael. Thank you for inviting me. I always enjoyed my time with you. Peace and blessings.
Me too, brother. All right, Hotep. Peace. The heart, give us a like on this broadcast. You can register for this 12-week online history course that I teach at our web. You can register at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And then we go through and analyze the transatlantic slave trade as well. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Class #1 starts Saturday, November 4th, 2024, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we do the classes live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Okay. Click right here to register here for it. You can use this content with your children as well. I would say it's PG-13. It's not overly graphic. We won't do a lot of cursing, anything like that. It's interactive. You can ask questions. We have a live text chat. You can see me. I can't see you. So you don't have to worry about, you remember during COVID and everybody was on Zoom going to work, and you're at home, you got your pajama bottoms on, but you got a suit on top or something like that, or a blouse on top. Okay. So you can wear whatever you want to wear. Okay. I don't take attendance in the class, anything like that. Download the class lesson plan here as well. I'm going to post a link here so you can register for the class. It's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Also, follow me on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. My YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. And on Instagram, Michael Imhotep as well. You can also, if you want to support us through Cash App or PayPal, you can do that also. You scroll down the page, we have our Cash App information, $ the AHN show through Cash App and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. We added information here, information about the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But here's our Cash App information, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there, most likely. You click on the link. It takes you to our Cash App QR code. Okay, so